All right, so we're jumping headfirst into part three of Growth and Scaling Downfalls from Coruscant Technologies. This section, the one on strategy, it really grabbed my attention. It gets into how companies can really level up, and who doesn't love a good level up story?
Strategy is, well, it's essential, right? It's the roadmap, the guiding light for growth. But like this report highlights, there are some seriously common pitfalls that can really trip companies up along the way.
And this isn't just for the CEOs sitting in those big corner offices, is it? I mean, whether you're part of a team trying to scale a project or, hey, even just fascinated by what makes companies tick, understanding how strategy actually works in the real world, that's gold. That's valuable. So let's unpack this thing. Let's start with macro strategy. In your view, what really resonated with you about how Coruscant defines this whole idea of macro strategy?
Their comparison, the one to a road trip, it's actually really apt. Macro strategy, it's that big picture planning. It's about, defining your destination, where you're going, understanding your resources, what you've got to work with, and then, and this is important, choosing a route, a path that aligns with, get this, your values.
So, like, are we aiming for the fastest route or are we taking the scenic route?
Right.
Does fuel efficiency, does that matter more than hitting every single roadside attraction? I love that comparison because it gets at those really, really fundamental questions that shape a company's choices.
Exactly. And what I find fascinating, what I keep coming back to, is how this plays out in their example, the one about responding to competitors. A company, especially one with a macro strategy laser focused on aggressive market dominance, right? They might react very differently than a company prioritizing sustainable long-term growth. You see the difference there?
It's like their core values, they almost dictate their reflexes, don't they? If their gut instinct is to be the biggest, the baddest player in the game, well, they might see a competitor as a threat, something to eliminate. But if
Mhm.
their focus, their main thing is sustainable growth, maybe, just maybe, they see an opportunity there, an opportunity to learn, to grow, maybe even to collaborate.
You hit the nail on the head. That's a really insightful observation. This source, it really emphasizes that macro strategy. It isn't just a static set of goals. It's not etched in stone. It's a mindset, an organizational mindset that influences every single decision a company makes. Every single one.
Which, of course, begs the question, what happens when, you've got this clear macro strategy, but your day-to-day decisions, the stuff you're doing on the ground, what happens when those don't quite line up? That seems like a recipe for disaster, doesn't it? That's where I think micro strategy comes in. Am I right?
Absolutely. 100%. And Corzon's take on this, it really resonated with me. It really did. They argue, and I think they make a compelling case, that even if you have this fantastic, this amazing big picture plan, your micro strategies, those on the ground decisions, those little things can make or break you, especially, and this is key, especially during that crucial proof of concept phase. That's where the rubber meets the road.
Okay, so let's take a step back for a second. Let's define proof of concept for our listeners, just because that's a term, we hear it a lot, but sometimes it gets thrown around without a lot of context. So in the simplest terms, what are we talking about when we say proof of concept?
It's like, imagine you have this great idea, right? A new product, a new service, whatever it might be. The proof of concept phase, it's basically you testing that idea out in the real world, seeing if it's actually viable, if it holds water.
So how does MicroStrategy play into that testing phase?
It's all about the choices you make, the decisions, those little decisions, as you're testing that idea. Say you have this new product idea, right? Your micro strategies during that proof of concept phase, they might involve things like how you're going to market this thing, your pricing model, maybe even just how you're going to collect feedback from those early adopters. Each of those decisions, no matter how small they seem, they can impact whether that proof of concept is deemed a success or, and let's be honest, a failure.
And this is where it gets really, really interesting because the source, Coruscant, they highlight that without a clear definition of success, failure, let's not forget failure, beforehand, you can get lost. You can really get lost in the weeds. They use a marketing example, and I thought it was brilliant. I really did. Do you mind, could you break that down for us a little bit?
Sure, yeah. They were talking about how a marketing tactic that could be incredibly effective for one company could totally backfire, like completely blow up for another company, even if it seems on the surface, even if it seems successful.
It's all about context, isn't it?
Exactly. And the key difference, the thing that often separates success from failure, it lies in how well that tactic, that specific thing you're doing, how well it aligns with the company's overall brand identity and, crucially, their target audience. You got to know who you're talking to.
Right. It's like using, like, I don't know, using a pop-up ad campaign to sell, like, luxury washes. You might get some clicks, sure, you might. But does it align with the image, the feeling of exclusivity and sophistication that a luxury brand wants to project? Probably not. So in that case, the micro-strategy, that pop-up ad, while potentially effective on its own, it really clashes with the macro strategy, that luxury brand image. And that's where things can go sideways and fast.
It's all about that harmony, when you're macro and micro, when they're singing the same tune, it's like a well-oiled machine, beautiful. But oh boy, when they clash, chaos, inefficiency, confusion, you name it. It can even, and this is the worst part, it can even damage your brand, your reputation.
Yeah, it's not just about having a strategy, a plan, any old plan. It's got to make sense at every level, right? From the top floor to the ground floor. And you know what? Coruscant points this out. They say this clash, this macro-micro clash, it's not always intentional. It's not always, some evil plot. Sometimes, and this is interesting, sometimes it's like a result of these subtle disconnects within an organization. They even have a name for it. They call it cultural dissonance. I love that. Cultural dissonance. What'd you make of that?
Oh, it's huge. It really is. It's a fundamental concept. This cultural dissonance, in this context, and I think this is important to clarify, it refers to, well, it's like a misalignment. A misalignment between the values, what a company says it cares about, and the behaviors, what they actually do, that are encouraged, internally, and of course the strategic direction, where they're actually trying to go.
So paint me a picture, give me a visual. What does that look like in the real world? What does that cultural dissonance actually look like? Give us an example.
Okay, imagine this. You've got a company, right? And they're all about work-life balance. Publicly, I mean, they shout it from the rooftops. It's part of their core values,
Yeah.
right? That's their macro strategy, a part of it. But then, and here's the kicker, then they put this immense pressure, this crushing pressure on their employees to work long hours, to pull all-nighters, to meet these crazy, unrealistic deadlines. See the disconnect?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. That's a recipe for disaster. That's burnout. That's resentment. That's just bad news all around. It really highlights how that disconnect, that gap between the big picture and the day-to-day reality, the trenches, it can really undermine even the best, the most well thought out plans. But how do we prevent this? I mean, is it preventable? How can we make sure that our macro and micro, that they're in sync, that they're aligned, that we're not creating this cultural dissonance, this breeding ground for negativity? Did the report offer any guidance there?
It did. And one of their key points, and I think it's crucial, is communication.
Yeah.
And not just any communication, it has to be clear. It has to be two-way communication. It's not enough for, the higher-ups, the leadership team, to just dictate the macro strategy from their ivory tower.
Yeah.
It's got to be a dialogue.
Because, let's be honest, it's often those teams, the ones on the ground in the trenches, they're the ones who see the roadblocks first, right? They see the detours, the potholes. They're dealing with the reality, the nitty-gritty of the market and the customer feedback, what's actually working and what's not. They often have these incredible insights, these golden nuggets that could lead to these really important, sometimes even course corrections.
Precisely. Ignoring that feedback, it's not just, a missed opportunity. It can actually foster this sense of distrust, this us versus them mentality. It's about creating a culture, an environment where everyone, and I mean everyone, understands the big picture, the goals, the mission, but also feels empowered, important to raise concerns, to voice their opinions, and to suggest alternatives.
It reminds me of that classic example, that cautionary tale of Nokia. They were the kings, right? The undisputed kings of the mobile phone market. But then, and this is the sad part, they failed to adapt, to evolve quickly enough to the rise of smartphones. And the story goes, that some employees, they saw the writing on the wall, they saw it coming, but their concerns, their warnings, they were just ignored. They fell on deaf ears. That's a powerful example, a sobering reminder of the cost of not having those open lines of communication, of not listening to those on the front lines.
It's a story that should be taught in business schools everywhere, as a warning. And it highlights another really crucial point that Coruscant makes, this idea of flexibility, of adaptability. A good strategy, a winning strategy, it's not set in stone. It can't be. It has to evolve. It has to adapt as the market changes, as new information comes in, as we learn from our mistakes, as we, stumble and get back up.
Sticking to a plan stubbornly when it's clearly not working, when all the signs are saying turn back, that's not strategic. That's just, it's just foolish, isn't it? Sometimes you got to be willing to take a detour, to adjust your route, maybe even rethink your destination altogether. But how do you know? How do you know when those course corrections are needed? What are the signs?
That, my friend, is where data comes in. Data-driven decision-making. It's not just a buzzword, it's essential. Coruscant, they hammer this point home throughout the entire report. You can't just rely on your gut feeling, on your intuition, even on anecdotal evidence. You need hard data. You need to collect it, you need to analyze it, to track your progress to see what's working, what's not working, and then based on those insights, to make informed strategic adjustments along the way.
So data, it's like your compass, right? It keeps you on course even when you're in uncharted territory, even when you're in the wilderness. It's about using those insights, those data points to inform your decisions and make sure that your micro strategies, those everyday actions, are always in alignment, always pointing towards your overall goals. It's like, think of it like having a GPS in your car, right? You punch in your destination, you get the fastest route, the most efficient route, but you still got to pay attention, right? You got to watch out for those road conditions, the traffic updates, those unexpected detours. Sometimes you got to make a pit stop or two along the way. You can't just blindly follow the GPS, right?
That's a perfect analogy. Data gives you the big picture, the lay of the land, but you still need that on-the-ground awareness, that ability to react to what's right in front of you, to make those micro-level adjustments. And you're right, sometimes those seemingly small decisions, those little tweaks, they can have a huge impact on your overall journey. They can be the difference between success and failure, really.
Absolutely. So, as we're wrapping up, we've covered a lot of ground here. As we're wrapping up our deep dive into strategy, this fascinating Coruscant report, what are some key, some really actionable takeaways that our listeners, our fellow strategy nerds can actually put into practice, whether they're, leading a company, a team, or even just their own personal projects, their own endeavors? What have we learned here today?
Well, for me, it all boils down to alignment. Aligning your macro and micro strategies. That's the name of the game. It's about having that clear vision for the future, that North Star, but also being adaptable, being responsive to the ever-changing landscape. It's a balancing act, really. Yeah. Sticking to the plan when it makes sense, but also knowing when to pivot, when to change course.
And that's where communication comes in, right? You've got to break down those silos, those walls between the leadership team, the ones making the grand plans, and the teams on the ground, the ones actually doing the work. You've got to create a culture of open feedback, a space where people feel safe to speak their minds, to raise concerns, to share ideas. And this is crucial. Everyone needs to understand the why. Why are we doing this? What's the bigger picture? Because when everyone's on the same page, when everyone's rowing in the same direction, well, you're much more likely to reach your destination, to achieve those goals. Wouldn't you agree?
100%, yeah. And never, and I mean never, underestimate the power of data. Track your progress. Analyze what's working, what's not working. Don't be afraid to course correct, to make those tough decisions based on the insights you're gathering. Data-driven decision-making, it's not just a fancy term. It's essential for navigating this crazy, complex world of growth and scaling.
This has been fantastic. A really, really insightful deep dive. It's really got me thinking differently about strategy. It's not just a document, a static plan. It's a living, breathing thing. It's a process that requires constant attention, adaptation, collaboration. It's a team sport.
I couldn't agree more. It's a journey, not a destination. The companies, the teams, the individuals that really thrive, they're the ones who are constantly learning, evolving, refining their approach along the way. They're not afraid to experiment, to make mistakes, to get back up and try again. That's how you grow, that's how you scale, that's how you succeed in the long run.
So for all our listeners out there, those of you joining us on this journey, here's something to chew on, something to ponder. Think about a goal, a big, hairy, audacious goal that you're working towards right now. How are your daily actions, those micro strategies, how are they aligning with that big picture vision? Are you on the right track? And if not, what can you do today, right now, to course correct, to get back on track and make sure you reach your destination?
Keep those strategic wheels turning, folks. Never stop learning, never stop adapting.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of strategy. Until next time, keep those minds sharp and those strategies even sharper.